strong, so mighty. My God's plans for me goes beyond my wildest dreams. There's nothing my God cannot do. There's nothing my God cannot do. There's nothing my God cannot do.
Well, welcome to Wellness Issues. I'm your host, Chris Sylvain, and we're so thoroughly excited about today's show and obviously wellness issues, where we focus on mind, body, and spirit of the individual and the wellness of the community. And when we look at the wellness of the community, it's directly related to the criminal justice system. Our individual wellness is totally related to, not totally dependent upon, but totally related to our outward community. And the criminal justice system is the cog that drives the entire machine. And we look at the African American male, and we can see his position. We have an awesome guest for you today, highly distinguished guest. Really, we're very excited about a young lady in her career. She has a Juris Doctorate from Yale Law School and M.P.A, Princeton University, School of Public and International Affairs, New York University. She's a professor at Loyola University School of Law, faculty over there. Her research interest includes criminal procedure, criminal law, and civil rights, domestic and international human rights, law and poverty, race and the law. So we welcome and excited to have Dr. Andrea Armstrong. Welcome, Dr. Armstrong. How are you today?
Good. How are you? You can just call me Armstrong or Andrea.
All right. All right. But truly giving honor where honor is due. Just an exciting career. I was just looking at it. I just think it's just fantastic looking at the fields. And particularly today, we want to focus on, I guess the relationship between international law and say the Constitution, how we look at it, here in America, concerning the African American male. There's a lot of, I know the sentencing commission or whatever, sentencing project, they made an appeal to the United Nations or whatever, looking at the human rights as relating to the African American male. Historically, though, the international community has been more favorable to the cause of civil justice than America. Your thoughts there?
Well, I think it depends, right? I mean, I think every country finds a way to penalize or subordinate those with darker skin. You see it across countries, right? Mm-hmm. But I think what's going on here is really a unique situation where the rest of the world is looking at us saying, how many people do you have in prison? Right? I mean, they are shocked at not only our numbers of incarceration, but also our hyper-incarceration, particularly of young men who are black and who live in urban areas. Mm-hmm. And so to see such a distinct impact, I think, is actually an anomaly in the world. Even though I would say that everywhere in the world we are dealing with different types of racial segregation and discrimination, but they're shocked at how we have perverted our criminal justice system to do this.
And I'm just glad you just hit the nail right on the head. I mean, I wish we can put those words on a billboard, and just flash it, because historically, though, America, has been able to have this different type of justice system that the rest of the world is all, still saying. And again, I mean, obviously, someone say, no, we got the best in the world here, right here in America. What are you talking about? We got all the, Idi Amin and so forth. What are you talking about? But concerning the African American male, our story is different.
Our story is different. I mean, I think, we should be celebrating today, the Fifth Circuit yesterday, upheld a new trial for Albert Woodfox, and I don't know if you know him. He's one of the Angola Three. and he has been in solitary confinement for over 40 years. And the reason that they granted him a new trial is because in 1998, in Louisiana, the judge could pick the grand jury foreperson. And it was done in a way that it was racially discriminatory because they never picked black folk, right?
Right.
And so that was in 1998 here in Louisiana, right? Which was a retrial from a 1972 trial that was also had its own issues.
Wow.
So to say that, we have a distinct way of using our criminal justice system, and yes, we have incredible protections, if honored, that are built into our system that we don't have in other countries.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that the society that we're operating in is completely divorced from the legal process.
Okay. And the law, and we dealt with this last week, the law, no matter how much we want to jump and scream, we have so-called the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment or whatever. No matter how much we want to jump and scream, the Supreme Court has not honored, to me, the intent of it. And we have no real recourse through legislation, it appears, no easy recourse. And so what are we left with?
Well, I actually would disagree about no easy recourse through legislation. There was North Carolina, which has really been looking to kind of international law and trying to figure out, some of the activists there have really been trying to figure out how can we do things better. North Carolina, up until recently, they had a law about the impact that specifically looked at the racial impact of the criminal justice system, right, in each individual case, and in particular in the death penalty.
Okay.
And that was a huge legislative achievement. Now, it just got vetoed and overruled by the next legislative body, right? So sometimes we take two steps forward and we take one step back.
Okay.
But I think there's a lot of work to be done around organizing and making our politicians responsive to us, right?
Okay.
The law, you're right. I think, the intent of the Equal Protection Clause may be one thing, but the court, over the last couple of decades for sure, has gradually narrowed the types of things that satisfy an equal protection violation, right? It's not enough that we say, listen, 1 in 3 African-American males is going to be under correctional supervision at some point in his lifetime, right? It's not enough that we say the disproportionate incarceration where you're looking at 20% of the black male population that is not incarcerated does not have the right to vote, in part because of their prior time and their prior criminal record.
Right.
So I think that we really need to think about what the court is doing beyond just this disproportionate impact, because what the court wants is proof that they were intending to discriminate against black men, right? And that, in this day and age, is a lot harder to prove.
But see, that's what's so nuts about it, and that's we go back to the term genocide, and I kept looking at it, various definitions or whatever, and I don't even know if it's even worth trying to figure out whether it applies or not. But what we do know is from slavery to segregation to mass incarceration, we've constantly had this drumbeat of devaluation of the African American male, and at the same time, the arguments that seem to be almost common sense, as you said, the numbers are staggering. Even till this day, rarely will you see somebody discuss the level of incarceration and say, hey, this is just racism, period. It is what it is. And it's almost totally undeniable looking at the statistics and everything else like that. But from the broader community, from whether it's the news or whatever, I can think about during the 400 years of slavery. People just didn't talk about it. During segregation, people just like, so what? All right, you're segregated and forget you. We're going to keep moving on.
Well, I think that there's lots of different ways, too, to define racism, right?
Okay.
And so do I think that, every single judge and prosecutor, et cetera, is saying, we need to put all blacks, because it's actually, the population impacted is black males in terms of being in prison, but one of the fastest growing populations is women of color.
Right.
And then, having half of their families basically incarcerated has negative impacts in terms of housing,
Right.
in terms of welfare for women of color on the outside. So, I think this is actually, it's something about our community as a whole.
Right.
But I think it also depends on how you define racism. I think
Okay.
there are people out there who may not be saying, yes, we are definitely going to harm this community. But I think it's a lot easier to put somebody in prison when you don't think that they're valuable,
Right.
when you have stereotypes about their work ethic,
Right.
when you have stereotypes about their ability to contribute. And it's those insidious types of thoughts, right,
Mm-hmm.
that I think do us the most harm. The intentional racists, right, they get caught,
Right.
right, because, they say what they think and they don't apologize for it.
Mm-hmm.
The ones I'm more concerned about are the people who don't stop to ask themselves, why is it easier for me to choose the death penalty for this individual versus another?
Right.
There's a lot of implicit bias studies that have shown that, if your shown face is a black face and a white face, and then you have to identify whether they're holding a tool or a gun,
Mm-hmm.
they are far more likely to falsely identify a gun in the hand of a black person
Right.
versus a white person.
Right.
Right? And so I consider that to be, biased
Right.
and racially discriminatory, but not necessarily intentional, right? We have to confront these ideas these shortcuts based on the culture, the media, and the values that we are living with, and say, yeah, I think that, and it's wrong to think that, right? And confront it head on.
Well, okay, but the thing there is but the law, I mean, that's good for business, that's good for, I always say whether trying to get jobs and housing and, whether you eat at the lunch counter and all of those things, all right, hey, we're a lot of bias, but by everything else, we create our own businesses, create our own schools, and create everything else. But the law, the legal system, by definition, is supposed to get rid of all that garbage.
Well, I'm not sure the Supreme Court agrees with you.
Wow, good Lord.
I think what, and it's been said in various ways. So, the case of Plessy versus Ferguson, that's one of our home cases where the Supreme Court, long time ago, approved of separate but equal.
Okay.
And there was a dissent in that case that said, hey, the Constitution is colorblind, right?
Okay.
Same person who wrote those words, in that same dissent, talked about how the white race was always going to be superior.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Okay.
So I think what the Supreme Court justices, some of them, certainly not all of them, but some of them would say the law can only do so much. We can emphasize formal equality, right, which is a very thin kind of empty type of equality where you just say, does everybody have 50 cents, right?
Okay.
Or we could think about equality in a much deeper way, right? One that's beyond what the law does, but law in its relation to society, in its relationship to the economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at what people have and where they end up. And that's a very different notion. And I think, unfortunately, the Supreme Court's more with the former, where they just want to see, does everybody have 50 cents?
Yeah, but we're speaking specifically, let's go to even drug crimes or crimes themselves. Currently, because of that bias, whatever way it comes, the racism where the black man is devalued to a certain extent, the 3/5 rule. So so police officers are faced with it, the judges are faced with it, the prosecutors are faced with it, their own implicit biases, and so the end result ends up being a dehumanization that's worse than segregation. All right. So whether they intend or not, if they have it. So when they're participating in the criminal justice system, and I guess you're saying it, and I guess I keep repeating myself because it's still unbelievable. The law is saying, hey, okay, we know all these black men are in jail, but there's nothing we can do about it because they don't really intend to discriminate. They just happen to arrest the black guy and let the white guy go free. They happen to put the black guy, give him 20 years, and the white guy gets probation. You know what I mean? The heroin addicts, they get to take a drug, and go in the treatment program, but the black guy sits in jail for 30 years. And so the Supreme Court's saying, that's not good, but hey, it's not our area.
I mean, it gets even worse than that, right? I mean, there's been so many studies on the death penalty. And the Supreme Court in a case called McCleskey versus Kemp was presented with evidence that it said, even if true, right, that, depending on the race of the victim, so if the victim was white, then the defendant was more likely to get the death penalty, particularly where the defendant was black, okay? Versus if the victim was black, they were less likely. The defendant was less likely to get the death penalty. So if you want to talk about devaluing black life, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so the Supreme Court was confronted with these studies, and the studies were good, right? Mm-hmm. And what they said is, yeah, that may be true, but you can't show me that the individual prosecutor in your case deliberately chose the death penalty because of your race, right? And that's what the law requires, and that's why I think we need to do so much more in terms of organizing. So one of the things that I've really been looking at is we have no idea what's happening inside of our prisons.
Right.
And
True.
Our jails.
True.
We have no idea.
True.
And maybe we should, right? Maybe we should require our jails and prisons to publish certain types of data. I want to know, for example, how many of those guys are actually receiving mental health treatment, certain types of medical treatment. I want to know how many of those, how many assaults are happening in prison. I want to know what types of terms people have for solitary confinement. So there's lots of questions, and those questions, if we answer them, then we'll have better insight into how the black community as a whole is being impacted, because there's tons of studies that show us that simply being touched by the correctional system, right?
Yes.
So that could be even, a couple of days in jail has a negative impact on health. It can predict your health, your prior incarceration history.
Okay. Now, but that's where it goes back to the international community. International law, all right, this is a United States Supreme Court. And even though we know it doesn't have, the United Nations can't come over here and say, hey, guys, y'all clean it up. They couldn't do it during slavery, couldn't do it during segregation. But obviously the United Nations, the case going to the United Nations, does it have any value whatsoever?
Well, I mean, you can hope that there's public pressure. I mean, I certainly think that, when the Special Rapporteur on torture for the UN, Juan Mendez, he came out and said solitary confinement is torture. Right? That's huge. We have over 80,000 people. We think, because we don't have enough data, we think we have 80,000 people who are confined to cells for 22 to 23 hours a day.
Okay.
Right? For months, even years. So I think that international pressure can really help. Now, to the extent that, there's not really, in terms of the UN, there's the International Court of Justice, but what they're looking at is cases between countries, right?
Okay.
So we can hope that, for example, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination at the UN or more work by the Special Rapporteur on Torture. We've had visits here in New Orleans from the Special Rapporteur on Housing from the UN.
Right.
To look at our lack of low-income housing and the demolition of so many of our housing areas post-Katrina, right? We can look to them for pressure and for influence, but in terms of, in terms of actually making the U.S. do something, that's not how the UN works, right?
South Africa, international pressure.
That's right.
But we had a Nelson Mandela.
We did. I mean, I think, but that, you want to think about how long that took, right?
Yes, you're right.
Remember? So there was South Africa and there was international pressure, but, this was still during the times of Reagan when, we had investments in the South African government, right? Coca-Cola was still producing there. It was a long campaign to create, disinvestment, to get business on board, and to make that pressure really meaningful.
I know, Dr. Armstrong, it's so rich. Believe me, we got to, we not reschedule. We have to do it again, and I know you have to run. I know you have to run it a little bit, so I want to be respectful of that time. But I guess to sum it up, though, your from your experience and all the understanding, the legislative process becomes the only recourse at this point.
I think the legislative process right now is our best, and that doesn't mean that we're going to stop fighting on each and every case, right? And there are good judges out there. There are good prosecutors, and there's good defense lawyers, right? And the most important work that we can do in organizing is not just looking at the legislature, but supporting the people who are actually engaged in the fight and who are doing good and trying to make others do better.
Okay. Hey, that does it. That is something to grab. That's marching orders that we can all grab. We thank you. We honor you, your work, your career, and still young and still have so much vigor to keep going on. So we definitely want to have you on again, and we cannot appreciate those words anymore. Thank you.
I'd love to. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Armstrong. Well, people, as we can hear and as we can see, the fight is on. That literally, and again, it's racial in its cause. And let's make sure we're clear about this. It's racial in its effect. But that doesn't mean that all white people are bad people, all green people, brown people. That's not what the statement is. But what the statement is saying is that if it was all little orange people that were being arrested, then everybody should be working to help the orange people for justice and righteousness. And so it just so happens that it happens to be people of African descent, let's say of darker skin, that where the issues are being created. So therefore, but all people, whether they're white, black, orange, or green, there has to be a sense of justice to say that this is totally wrong, and it cannot be allowed. And we've been making this argument for years and years and years. But hey, at this point in time, this has to be it, that we have to speak to the larger community, but we have to speak to the black community also, because we have to have awareness about these injustices and wrongs. And so therefore, the court system, hey, it's not the way to go. Long road there. The legislative bodies, these are people that are elected by us. We are the minority, so we need to make sure the majority understands what righteousness is. And we'll say it over and over again. We're speaking about justice, and justice from a standpoint outside of God, to me, is not justice. That's the problem, because we've moved this concept of justice away from God, so people make justice into whatever they want it to be. And what happens is the strong are the ones who rip apart those who don't have power, whether we don't have economic power, political power, or whatever power that we don't don't have. Those who are strong says, well, forget about you. We can discriminate against you in housing, discriminate against you in arrest, and in every other area. And since we're stronger than you, we have more money than you, there's nothing you can do about it other than sit there and take it and be step and fetch it and happy and scratch your back and be happy and walk along the way and take whatever handouts that we give to you. And I think that all people of righteousness, again, all people of righteousness should be up in arms. It should be our priority. It should be our focus. It should be everything that we need to do, saying this is wrong. If one young black male is sent to prison unjustly, then that's enough. But when we have a third of all black males going to prison, when we have people sitting in jails in prison who are guilty of a crime, some of them may be, but the point of it is that others who have committed the same crime get a chance to walk scot-free and become presidents of corporations and everything else like that, that we have to say that enough is enough is enough is enough, and it has to stop now. Every police officer, every judge, every prosecutor. And so when it's time for them to vote, everybody that's speaking about being elected. And so what happens is that the problem we have now is that nobody's even talking about it. And so we have to demand, if you want to come into a church, you have to talk about it. You want the vote, you need to talk about the mass incarceration, hyper incarceration. You want somebody's vote, then talk about it. Say that it's wrong. Don't come in here trying to be a judge or a jury or anything else like that. Unless they're willing to acknowledge the sin, acknowledge the crime. Every preacher, you want to preach? If you want to preach about it, then preach about this wrong. Don't tell me about Jesus unless you can talk about mass incarceration. Don't tell me about the God of justice unless we can talk about mass incarceration. No, the two don't go together, that somebody can figure that they can preach anything about God, but then look at their fellow human beings, and that is a human being. We're not 3/5. We're not animals. We're not dogs. We're not gorillas or anything else like that. We are human beings, and therefore, since we are human beings, that there's no reason in the world somebody can claim to know Jesus, claim to know God, and then allow other human beings to be dehumanized in the same city, in the same country, on the same planet, so to speak. So therefore, everybody who claims to know God should cry loud and spare not, and hold every one of us to a high level of accountability, no matter where they come from, no matter where they're going, that everybody who claims to be a leader must be held to a level of accountability, knowing that there's an injustice going on today, right now. There's injustices going on, that there has to be a level of accountability to say, what are you doing and why are you doing it? What did you know and when did you find out? What is going on? In fact, for every preacher, every judge, everyone that is standing in positions of authority, they have to be held accountable. And particularly the politicians, particularly those that are elected. And what are they doing concerning mass incarceration? Everyone, it should be a website saying, what are their record on mass incarceration? Are they working towards eliminating it? White, black, green, and orange. Are they claiming to know God? And that's the first thing. They can be dealt with right there. Do they claim to know God? Say, do you know God? You claim to know God. What about the young black men that are in prison unjustly? And to say that, they're the ones that's committing a crime. We don't need any more statistics. We have enough statistics where the point is already proven. We have enough data. We have enough people. We have all of the professors and the PhDs. They have done all of the work that needs to be done. No, it is clear there is an injustice that is going on in the community. Every newspaper writer, everyone that's writing in the newspaper, every television anchor person, every editorialist, every political party, and in fact, it's the same thing during slavery, where everybody should have been concerned. During the Holocaust, everybody should be concerned. And during segregation, everybody should be concerned. There's nobody can claim, I didn't know. Nobody told me. No, they should have found out. They should have inquired. They should have read about it. They should have researched. The first question is, do I care about my fellow man? Am I concerned about somebody else? Do I have love in my heart? No matter who it is, that has to be the standard by which we live and the standard by which we die.
Searched all over, couldn't find nobody.